First of all, thank you very much, all of you who've taken time out of your busy Thursday morning to join us. I know it's a difficult time of the year, the changing season and the new lockdown rules and all sorts of other things. I'm sure from an operational standpoint, as well as a personal one, you're all very busy. So to take some time to look at larger strategic issues, we appreciate the amount of time that you're taking for this. So welcome to the third session in the Anstey BEAMA webinar series on open energy data. We're really, really excited and pleased to be presenting this for you. BEAMA and Anstey have been circling around each other for a few years now, looking for some things to do together, and I'm just really delighted that we struck upon this. There is I just want to give a little bit of context. I've got 30 seconds left before I pass to Chris. There is the serious intention here is to really help to define, to identify ways that the supply chain and those around it can be a bigger, more important part of the national conversation about energy data and what to do with it, how to get it, how to make sure that its benefits are felt, and how to protect consumers and companies along the way. So without wanting to go into too much detail, at the end of this, we are really hoping to have something approaching an action plan. Once we know how we're going to get involved, clearly we have to decide what we want to say. So that's part of this as well. Today we have a very high-powered panel. Very, very pleased to welcome Erwin Schultz. Actually, Chris, you're probably going to want to introduce these people. So Erwin Schultz and Alastair Martin, who's from Flexitricity, have kindly joined us to talk about what sort of data they want and how we might be able to provide it for them. Chris, I'm going to pass to you now. Thank you very much, everyone, and look forward to the chat after the presentation. Chris.
Lovely, thanks, Jeremy. Good morning, everybody. I'm Chris Pritchett. For those who don't know, I'm head of the energy team at Anstey, and I suppose my qualification for wanting to be involved in these seminars was working on the steering group of the Energy Data Task Force over the last 18 months or so with Laura Sanders and Dr. Richard Dobson and all the very clever people at Catapult, and also the wider industry stakeholders that contributed to that work. And the fascinating thing for me in that was the approaches to open data that have been taken by people outside of the energy industry, whether that's financial services or that's TfL or you know, National Geographic or other industries that have gone further down the road of sort of creating data access for a wider range of people. And that was where I think a lot of the key learning was. So I think in the first session we heard from Laura about how that momentum has grown and how the recommendations of the task force were well received by government and by Ofgem BEIS. And indeed, sort of stakeholders in the energy industry themselves are taking that agenda forward at a decent pace. And that was really exciting context for the wider movement, if you like, towards unlocking system benefits, accelerating decarbonisation, and really making headway towards a more flexible, efficient, and democratic system, I suppose. The next session, then we heard a little bit more about sort of data platforms themselves as to where and how the data can be managed by actors within that system. And we heard from Madeline Morris at the Grantham Institute, who are building 4 large testbed projects to look at how that system data is handled, effectively creating energy islands for connecting multiple assets. And so that's the sort of the bedrock upon which these kind of systems are built, whether that's moving towards, you know, 100% asset mappings to moving towards building a digital twin of the energy system, so you can properly optimize assets and the flow of electrons within that system. We then heard from Mark Bartlett at Electrolink, who are sort of long-established players and purveyors of energy data within the market, and their new system product Flexa. And again, a different perspective there from Electrolink, given that they are, you know, they are clearly people who make energy data available. It's not always open. It's also but it's that concept of saying, here is the information set that has been gathered and is available to system actors in order to go about innovating, optimizing, or developing that system more efficiently. So hopefully you can feel that we're on a slightly logical journey here as to bringing us onto today, and hearing a little bit more about the type of data that we need. And I'm really excited to hear from our panelists today, both in terms of sort of almost as the technical energy view, and also, you know, what Alastair can do with that data and has been doing with that data when it comes to operating virtual power plants or working the balancing mechanism, and delivering those system benefits on behalf of customers and the rest of us. Before I hand over and introduce Owen properly, I just wanted to flag as well for those on the call that there has been a new competition launched by Small Business Research Institute for modernising energy data applications. It's a relatively small award, but again, quite exciting that, again, that is being pushed out as by way of a competition. I think the closing date is the 18th of November. Pretty wide eligibility and scope for that, for that grant and that award. So do sort of keep an eye out for that one, and it may be worth participating or putting in a bid. So without further ado, I'd be delighted to introduce Erwin Schultz from IBM, who works in the utilities and power sector, has a sort of extremely detailed knowledge on the technical side, on IT platforms, and as I mentioned, sort of building digital twins and sort of mapping systems out and making them work more efficiently by way of a digital shadow. Owen, it's fantastic to have you on the call. Apologies if my introduction is something you want to elaborate on or amend. We're very excited to hear what you have to say. Over to you.
Thank you, Chris. You've mentioned digital twins at least twice, which I'm not going to talk about.
Which is ironic, I guess.
But it is a hobby of mine, so
well, I'll fully let you take that forward.
At any time as well. So yes, no, thank you for that introduction. So as far as digital twins are concerned, I'm also the chair of the Digital Twin Working Group at Tech UK. So yes, that is certainly something that I'd be more than happy to talk about on another occasion as well. Can you see my slides? Just a quick check to make sure that's working.
We can, yeah. Looks great.
Excellent. Okay, after a few hiccups, when we did the tech check, that seems to be working now. Right, so I've already been introduced, so let's get straight into it. I've got really just three key messages I want to leave you with. And the first one is that we shouldn't let perfection get in the way of progress. I think there is a huge danger of a lot of navel gazing happening and not doing anything. If you've seen anything about IBM, you know that we are very much on an AI journey. It's a key part of our portfolio, but none of that actually works without information architecture. And I'm usually not one for these strap lines, but I quite like this one: no AI without IA. And then the last one is need for balance. So how do we fund this? And also there's some ethical considerations that I'll briefly touch on. Okay, so before we get into the kinds of data that we need, I think firstly maybe just a quick view on our vision and this concept of a cognitive enterprise or a cognitive energy system. We've for years been using the data on the left structured mainly, so tabular type data, and we've done run our businesses with that data. Pretty much behind our firewall. We've used some data from the outside, weather data, for example, to do forecasting in terms of energy consumption, as we've moved into renewables, into energy generation as well. But what we're seeing is that it's not just that kind of well-established data, but there is a lot more unstructured, dark and deep data. I'll quickly explain that. So dark data is data that we currently capture. So how many devices are out there that are linked to SCADA systems, for example, that capture data, but that never surfaces for any kind of analysis, that may or may not be used by the SCADA system, but certainly doesn't ever emerge for analysis. And then there's deep data, which our previous CEO, Ginny Rometty, defined as data that is not yet being measured, but that we could actually measure or collect without too much challenge. And then that's where edge computing, IoT, and so on are playing a huge role. The commoditization of that element is making it a lot cheaper to get a lot more data. You know, the creation of digital businesses where everything is digitally driven, which, you know, we've seen huge acceleration of that during this pandemic, and combined with use of that data and data intelligence is what we kind of define as a cognitive system, in energy, a cognitive energy system. So that's our vision of where we're going. And when you look at data, the different people use data, again, for different purposes. And I'm not going to go through all of these combinations here, but it can range from just enhancing the core using kind of the data on the left-hand side on the previous diagram, all the way to the top right-hand corner, where we're creating new business models, new ecosystems, which are reliant on digital exchange of data. So I'll give you an example there. We did some work with Tenet, which is now kind of blossomed into a multi-party program, in this case using blockchain technology. And so we've been using this diagram to map all our different energy projects. And as you can see, there are a lot of different actors in that. And in this case, we used electric vehicles as a balancing mechanism. And there are lots of actors involved. The transmission operator initially was Tenet, was the key one in the Netherlands, with whom we had the initial contract, but then distribution operators got involved. There's an aggregator. They're clearly the EV drivers and the EVs themselves. In Germany, actually, there's a very similar project, but using consumer side of the meter storage rather than electric vehicles for similar purposes. So just an example of how we're sharing that data of, you know, the status of vehicles, how much capacity they have, the willingness of owners to participate at any given time, alongside really technical data on the status of the network, and, you know, what they need, and then through to financial data, which says you actually get compensated for participating in an event. So that's an example of where we've done that. So let's get to the first point. So this whole idea of letting, you know, getting on in a messy world and actually doing stuff before everything is fully architected and completely resolved. And this is where I get to data standards. So data standards are critical. So you asked, you know, what kind of data format would we like data in? And standardized data is always good. And there's a range of them. I've just picked out 3 here. So common information model is probably the most prevalent one. A set of standards by the IEC. We've built our commercially available data model on top of that standard. So SIM is in data interchange standard. We've built a relational data model on top of that. Then building information management, which is you know, key to digital twins, for example. And in the energy environment, we have a lot of stuff that is built as well, big substations and so on, generators, that they all benefit from that kind of standard. And then we created the MQTT standard, which is becoming the de facto messaging standard for IoT devices. And these standards are great and they're very necessary, but they do take a long time to develop. They are generally not the drivers of innovation. They usually follow innovation. And that's why kind of one of my other hobby horses is going on about metadata and the importance of actually sharing not just data, but actually a good explanation of what that data actually means. So even without standards, data can be very useful if we tell people what it means. You know, yes, example from the water industry. In one company I worked with, they had in the same fields, due to historic reasons, a reservoir level was either given in percentage full or meters full. You can imagine the kind of confusion that can arise unless you know exactly which unit of measure applies to which reservoir. but it's not just the units of measure. It's, you know, where does the data come from? It might be simulated data, or is it actually measured data? How old is it? How accurate is it? What is its life, shelf life? At what point do you need to start ignoring it? And what are you allowed to use it for? And I'm going to plug an open source project that's actually come from the financial services sector. So we talked about open banking in the past, which is being held up by Icebreaker 1, who's in the final stage of the MEDA competition, as an exemplar. So another one there is Egeria, which is a platform for sharing metadata. And when I say platform, that's in the loosest sense of the word. It's an open source solution which provides distributed metadata sharing. So, I'd encourage you to take a look at that. I think it would be great if in the energy industry, we're the first ones outside of the financial services sector that actually starts using this and makes use of this to share metadata about what we do. Then the whole thing of AI, so and having information architecture. So you can read those stats at the top there that come from some work that our internal IBV has done. You know, we've all seen some of the stats before, that people don't understand their data, don't use a lot of their data, but that the data is absolutely critical to the decisions that they have to make. And if we're going to automate more of these decisions, we're going to rely less and less on people's intuition, which really is just a collection of data that we then, with the wetware process in some way, shape or form. If we want to move more of that, automate more of that, and use more machine learning type approaches and other AI approaches to deal with or to help us make these decisions, then we better be able to feed it with data and know the meaning of that data, know the accuracy of it, and so on. That has led us to create this AI ladder. So to say, you know, just to be able to implement AI, you need to first collect data, then organize it, then analyze it. So the first 3 steps in the ladder are all about data, and only then did you kind of build your models and infuse that data into, and I'm not a great fan of that one word, the infuse. That sounds a bit pompous, but the idea behind it is to operationalize AI, so that AI and decision making or decision support aren't just kind of toys on the outside, but they actually become part of the way we run our systems. You mentioned that platforms were mentioned in the past. So the way, one of the best ways we found of doing this, and this is where cloud has been a huge accelerator, is to push a lot of that data into a data platform and make it available within that, you know, alongside all the metadata that I've already talked about. And an example of where we did that is one where we worked with Electrolink, actually, with the, and WPD on an NIC project, NIA project around low carbon technology detection, LCT detection. So you can read the closed down report of that. So if you Google LCT detection, WPD, you should find that. And this was all about using data both within Electrolink, that Electrolink provided, as well as data that WPD had, to identify unregistered vehicles and EVs. We did look at heat pumps as well, didn't find many of those. But as you can see in this flow, again, most of that work is actually about getting the right data into the right format. And this included data like smart metering data. We looked at natural language processing of work order feedback data to see whether, for example, meter installers have potentially spotted that there is PV on the roof, or that there's an EV charge point or something, and made a note of it. And with that, we were able to identify quite a large number of unregistered LCT devices attached to homes. But all of this, there's the balance to be had. So our vision, I think, sounds great, but we need to look at, the cost and the benefits of that, and also some of the ethical concerns. So the report that we've referred to, and I think that's kicked this all off, the Energy Data Task Force report, said that data should be open by default. But that raises questions like who should pay for it, who will pay for it, and how much is this, all of this going to cost? Can we justify, which data can we justify making open? I mean, and some of the DNOs are, I think, to some extent, quite rightly concerned that, who's going to be the beneficiary? Are they going to end up having to become kind of the telcos of the internet era, where they make all of the investment, but it's the content providers that have made all the big profits? To some extent, I think that will require a bit of a leap of faith. So I think that we need to look at what's happened in other industries, and we have the advantage that we are usually in the energy industry a little bit trailing behind others, and look at what's happened to them, and see that actually where data has been opened up, it's actually benefited most of the participants. So I think it's going to be very difficult to make exact cost cases for or benefits cases for all of these initiatives, and there will be a lot of pressure on Ofgem as we go into ED2, I think, to kind of see what they allow DNOs to spend money on. But I think it will require a leap of faith by all of us to say, yes, we know this is going to work, and some things won't work, but the things that do will make up for those that don't. And so the last few words I was going to share with you were around risks and ethics. So I think we've all probably by now heard of AI bias, the fact that if our training data is not representative of the data, the actual target data that we're going to apply our models to, then we can get significant bias. So that's all the way from racial bias, for example, or gender bias in facial recognition software, for example. Then privacy. Now this is a huge debate around smart metering data in the energy industry, for example. So the restrictive nature of of the use that the DNOs can make of smart metering data is having a significant impact. So, for example, for the LCT detection, we only used legacy meter data. And that was deemed to be so coarse-grained that you couldn't really determine anything around people's behavior. We could have done a much better job, of course, if we were allowed to use smart metering data, but that would mean that we could also, with that data, determine people's behavior much more. Then the risk of failure, so as we automate more, and I think Boeing was a good example of this, we're making IT systems and software become much more critical to the energy network and the energy system as a whole. So how are we going to manage that? And one type of failure is if we fail to protect against cyber attack. So big questions that we have parts of the answers to. I don't think anybody has the whole answer to that. Then moving down from that, quite an interesting one. So I'm quite proud that one of my mentees was actually part of this project that published this paper on 5 technology design principles to combat the domestic abuse. So to what extent can digitalization, the tracking of people's behavior and movements and so on be used by abusers in a domestic abuse situation? And say they looked at and created these 5 principles for coercive resistant design, which we published, link at the bottom there. And then the last one, getting back to digital twins a little bit, the Gemini principles, which were published as part of the National Digital Twin Program, I think set out quite a nice, in those 9 blocks, set out quite a nice ethical framework for the use of data. In this case, the sharing of data to build a national digital twin, but I think this is broadly applicable. So we want to have lots of data. We want to use it to decarbonize our energy system in our drive to net zero, but we need to also do that with the backdrop of resilience of the system and the ethical considerations that we have towards society and individuals. So that's all I was going to say. Hope I've stuck more or less to time.
Erwin, fantastic. Thank you so much. And very well kept to time as well. Much appreciated for that. I'm particularly going to come back to you later on something that I think is a challenge for us all, which is that standards are slow and they follow rather than drive in innovation. I think that's obviously, that's never not been true. That's always been the case, but that's in this fast-moving data and digital world, that's an interesting one for us to play with and think with. Following now to almost the other end of the data ecosystem, as it were, from a company that I think has very different data needs to IBM and does very different things, no less exciting. So I think you've had an exciting morning already, Alastair. So can I welcome Alastair Martin, who is Chief Strategy Officer for Flexitricity. Thanks again, Erwin. Alastair, all yours.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, we actually had an exciting evening and another exciting evening to come. I'll just put my slides up and I hope that these come through. So yeah, Flexitricity, I'm assuming that these are on the screen. I'll tell you a few things about us, just to introduce people who may be less familiar with Flexitricity to what the company is and does. And then give some context to where data is important to us and perhaps some thoughts about where it's going to go in the future. I'm going to major at the end on electricity metering, just because that's really in flux right now. It's not the only part of the story, but it is an important part. So if I just click on, so Flexitricity, since 2008, we've been running a live operational system which provides flexibility to national grid in order to help balance supply and demand in the national electricity system, but it also responds to the needs of distribution network operators and the market generally. And we do that by connecting to electricity consumers and small generator owners, connecting to their assets and organizing them into something that's often called a virtual power station. And we're fully automated, but we run a control room. Our control room is, of course, is now distributed for lockdown reasons, but it's doing the same thing. And we respond to everything from nuclear failures to ebbs and flows in demand. So if I just click on, just some of the site types that we've worked with. We've actually been fairly heavy on combined heat and power. It's been a fairly large part of the portfolio. At one point, it was probably over 50%. We also work with industrial load. We work with logistics and data centers. But increasingly now, we're working quite very closely with merchant flexibility developers, and the big hot new category there, as we all know, is large batteries. All of these asset types are different and they all have different capabilities. So maybe if I just jump into some situations to give you an idea of what it means to use flexibility in the real electricity system. This was our first winter, this graph. You can see 11 years ago, 12 years ago, the layer cake of electricity production was very different. This is 1 day of electricity production on a cold January Saturday. And you have nuclear in yellow, coal is black, and gas is green. Those were the days when we thought gas was greener than coal. It is, but we've now got a completely different system, which is greener than anything that we could have imagined then. It's been a stunning transformation. Nevertheless, in those days, we were in the days of big power, and a nuke sat down just before the evening peak, which means disconnected rapidly. And this was a bit of a feature of that winter. We saw a few of those. And a few minutes after that, we received an electronic signal from National Grid, which we relayed out to our, at the time, very small portfolio of sites. So we started some emergency generation. We turned up some combined heat and power generation on a waste energy plant, and we turned down some consumption. I think that in those days, a cold storage was the industrial load that we had on the system at the time. that was enacted by National Grid, clicking a button manually on the desk in Wokingham in the Electricity Network Control Centre. Not everything happens that way. This one here, and not everything is obviously down to large nukes falling over. This one was a little bit different, and it wasn't associated with the peak. Tilbury Power Station had recently been converted to biomass firing, essentially running out its hours in an experimental mode, you might say. It turns out that wood pellets are harder to store than coal, and it caught fire during the morning pickup on a February morning. And pretty much, we were nowhere near peak, just clear, I need to make that clear. The system was nowhere near peak, it was in the morning pickup. So the issue was not number of megawatts demanded, it was how fast those megawatts were rising. And so we were called into action and we dispatched everything, nearly everything. We were held back on one unit. Grid sometimes does that, and a lot of the rest of the market was dispatched into that. Again, manually enacted from National Grid, and then electronic from there on. If I just click on, it's not always the case that things can be done manually. NEMO is the interconnector between Kent and Belgium. It's one of the newest interconnectors in. There's a couple more coming in the next few months, and maybe the newest, in fact. NEMO can transmit 1 gigawatt of electricity. On this particular day, February this year, it disconnected. Now, NEMO has actually been very reliable. This was a relatively rare event where quite early in its time where we saw it trip. And when a large infeed fails, you get a fairly rapid deviation in mains frequency. So that's the blue line, which you know is obviously 50 hertz. But it's not always 50 hertz, it varies all the time. And when there's a big hit to the system, you get a sudden drop. So below 49.6 hertz is in the concerning level for National Grid. That happens in a very small number of seconds. You also see the way it drops down. I've shown there also the rate of change of frequency on the orange line there, which has this quite interesting double jump that we often see. This creates dynamic issues, and we responded to that one. I think that probably the biggest element of our response was tripping off of consumption at chemical production sites. Also some data centers as well tripped onto emergency power in that. So the speed of the event has a lot to do with the type of resource that's used to deal with it. Another one from a couple of years ago. I actually had the name of this station on the slide when I first produced it, but National Grid made me take it off. It's one of the nukes. I've actually forgotten which one. And this is a zooming in on the frequency signal and the variations in it. And what we were doing there was experimenting with a new form of frequency response where we're getting it within half a second and we're responding not to the frequency but to the rate of change. What we were experimenting with there was actually the compressors in a cold storage environment, and you can see that they can actually respond when a threshold is hit. I'm showing that on the you see that on the orange line. You can see that we can trigger very quickly the assets to respond. Each square here, of course, as you can see, is 5 seconds long. Yeah, so different timescales, different activities. So I'll just maybe say a couple of things about electricity and the structure of it. Electricity in the UK is a bilateral market structure. That is to say, anyone can trade with anyone. And what happens is that people who are responsible for customer demand trade with people who have the ability to create electricity, and a buy and sell occurs, and everyone works as far ahead as they want, but normally 2 years is about as far as people will go. They go through to day ahead and they refine their positions, and in intraday markets they continuously refine their positions until they're at the point at which they think they've got as much as their customers will consume, and the generators have taken what they've sold is essentially an operating schedule. When electricity is bought and sold, it's always bought and sold in respect of a particular moment of delivery. This is very important. And then the gate comes down. That's an hour ahead of real time. National Grid says, stop trading. We're in charge now. And if you want to keep trading, you trade with us. That's National Grid. That's what the balancing mechanism is. Now, that's the simple version. The more complicated version is that there's now a capacity market whose job is to ensure that there are assets available to do these trades. There's also the ability for National Grid to take certain actions in a contract setting ahead of time. And a very important point here is that the reserve and response auctions are National Grid taking promises from people to agree to be able to do things. And there is a huge difference between promising to be available to respond to a frequency deviation and promising to be willing to stop consumption in the event of a network peak. The former is a promise to be there and to have a very specific number of megawatts that will respond in a very specific way. The latter is a promise to be willing to drop consumption. And in that case, if you're already not consuming, then you've already fulfilled your promise. These are very different propositions that suit very different asset types. National Grid can also forward trade. I reckon they're doing it right now because they've got a tight evening coming up. But the market now has the ability to some extent to trade into that last hour. And then you come to the point at which National Grid, right close to real time, is making decisions to dispatch reserves and then autonomous actions from frequency responsive contracts. Anyone who has a contract has to deliver whatever that contract requires at that time, and that's in real time. And then the bit everyone forgets, and this is where data become very important: settlement. All of this has to be paid for, and it has to be paid for accurately. That is one of the major challenges facing the industry just now. Rattling through, in planning what's going to happen, there's ahead of time, there's an awful lot of questions to ask. And all of these questions can be, to some extent, considered to be a part of this one I've put in bold here: availability. What are the assets that are available to do tasks that I want them to do? These are all about all these other measurements that include some of the metadata. They include statistical forecasts of, for example, a population of electric vehicles. Are they available to adjust their consumption in certain timescales? What promises are they making, and how firm are those promises? In real time, operational metering becomes extremely important. That's for National Grid in particular. When they enact something, they want to see that it's delivering. And then afterwards, settlement metering, which is a different process, becomes the key variable. Do we know that that asset did what it was supposed to do? I'm going to just skip past this very briefly. A new structure was created which allows, called the virtual lead party. It's called that for various historical reasons. We were the first active VLP. What this does is it creates the ability for a very much wider range of participants to be involved in this energy market that I've described, in particular the balancing mechanism, the real-time stuff. The key takeaway here is that it doesn't have to be an electricity supplier. It can be a technology provider. It could be IBM. It could be a charge point manufacturer. It could be individuals. And with this being as open as it is now, there is obviously a need to keep tabs on what people are doing in this new market. And this then brings me on to what I think is the key point here. Flexibility varies from place to place. Identifying which customers are flexible and when they are flexible is crucial to success. For example, in a cold store, we have pretty consistent availability of flexibility there. There are significant questions about whether or not you can do the same thing with refrigeration at the point of sale. Perhaps on the ones with doors, less so on the ones without doors. These are the nuances that are important. Is it a bank holiday weekend? Is everyone buying beer? They want it to be cold. These are the sorts of bits of information that cause variable availability. On the domestic side, well, electric vehicles have the ability to be flexible in how they consume most of the time, but not when you're planning a long journey, and not when you're already fully charged. On the other hand, nobody wants their electric shower to be considered to be a flexible resource. You do not want that turned off while you're standing in it. Fine, there's variation. What happens if you've got flexible and inflexible load behind the same boundary point, behind the same settlement meter, the same billing meter? So what do we do with that? Right now, we're ignoring the problem as an industry, or at least we have done up to now. This creates noise, it creates windfall gains and losses, it excludes some customers, and it leaves other things settled on guesses. And we think that that creates inefficiency and is not right for the market. So we've been working with Alexon, who fulfill a very important background role in the industry and are a major data crunching organization, to create this new modification called P375. Its Sunday name is metering below the boundary point. And what this is a valid route for sub-meters to form part of the settlement function. And this is now, it is going through its final consultation before it goes to the Gas and Electricity Markets Authority. We are hoping for final approval of this in February, at which point we will be in a wonderful position in respect of new flexible load types. And I'm talking here in particular about smart heating systems, electric vehicle chargers, domestic batteries, because we will then be in a position to allow manufacturers to install fully compliant metering systems under the new Code of Practice 11 into these systems, so that out of the box, they're ready to form part of the electricity infrastructure, and both for distribution networks and for national grid, acting through aggregators, through technology providers, through suppliers, whoever they may be. And this really matters. And the reason it matters is because, forgive me for using last year's numbers, the expansion in that we're expecting to see in electric vehicles, in electric home heating, is absolutely enormous. And these sorts of data are fundamental to fully settling, fully compensating all market participants for what they deliver, and making sure that they achieve that. And that is where I should stop, if that's okay.
Wonderful, thank you, Alastair. I'm not sure I should be jumping in here. I think this is for you, Sarah, but I just wanted to say two really inspiring and presentations from two quite different perspectives for data needs. So just wonderful, thanks. Sarah, shall I pass to you now? I've popped a few questions in the chat, but I couldn't seem to navigate the Q&A, but
oh no, well actually I did see your questions in the chat, and actually thank you from me as well, both Alastair and Erwin. I've been sat here furiously typing, struggling to keep up because I've been captivated by the slides, so I'll do my best to fill in the blanks there. But Jeremy, stay on, come back, because there's no point me reading out your question around the Ofgem and market development strategy, so why don't you go ahead and ask that one yourself?
As long as I can remember what I said. Yeah. So this is firstly for Alastair, I think. So Flexitricity and BEAMA and some of the members on the call as well, we've all been somewhat critical of Ofgem in terms of market development and longer term strategy. I think there are some things that we need to see done differently, but I wanted you to talk a little about some of the technical challenges to what you are doing and what the supply chain itself can do to help you address those. What do you wish we were doing more of or less of in terms of data provision? I suppose that's really a long way of saying, are you getting what you need from embedded measurement assets at the moment? And if not, what do you wish you were getting?
So on the for what we deal obviously in industrial, commercial, public sector, and we also have processes in train for the domestic sector. On the industrial commercial side, we get lots of products. We like them. We're good, and there are protocols that are established, and people need control of their assets, so they choose their boxes. And I don't think that there's a major problem there. There's lots of nice innovations, but we're good. On the domestic side, I've got two requests. One of them is where people are building smart assets for consumer homes. Read Code of Practice 11 and make your gear compliant with it. Is probably no more costly than making your gear compliant with not compliant with it. So just do that. And the other one is look at the things on Erwin's slide deck and do those. So and particularly the common standards, open protocols, and the correct security measures. So it's not just a question of making this market work well. It's a question of making this market allowable. We know that both Ofgem and the National Cybersecurity Centre will not accept the emergence of a market in which consumer lock-in occurs, so we need the open protocols, or in which national critical infrastructure is placed under threat, so we need the security. You saw, I think, the reason I put the sort of the war stories of the failing power stations up there is because it genuinely is a right now activity. If you know, assets with the ability to switch quickly were hacked en masse, then you can essentially simulate the failure of a large power station or the failure of several large power stations through that hack. So we need those to be achieved.
Wow, thank you. We I don't want to think about that. Let's keep doing what we're doing to make sure that doesn't happen. I would like, if possible, Erwin, I think there's a question here for you from our audience, from Tony Shorthouse of Plug-in Power. Tony says, there was reference made to open banking. Do you envisage this model might be applied to the emerging digital energy sector? Might it help with EV charge point roaming and other energy transactional data sets? I think that's for both of you, but Erwin, it was mentioned during your presentation. So would you like to lead on that one?
Yes, and I think the answer is yes. I mean, I think the open banking analogy is somewhat simpler, or the open banking solution is somewhat simpler than the overall challenge that we face. But for the kind of transactional stuff that Tony is talking about there, yes, I think something similar, an API-based, open API-based approach could deal with those things. I think there may be other technologies involved. I mean, that is to some extent what we're doing in the Netherlands with Tenet and Van der Bron, where we are using blockchain to make sure that we can actually tie energy events to financial transactions, and that there's trust throughout the market. So yes, I think so is it going to be exactly like open banking? Probably not. Are there analogies to be drawn? Are there lessons to be learned? Absolutely. I mean, the other point I'd make is, outside of the examples he uses, then we've got a very rich data set. I mean, there is huge amounts of GIS, graphical information system data, on where assets are and what, how they're connected to each other, which I think is somewhat more complex than some of the banking data that's shared, and also from a volume point of view is probably not really, using APIs might not be the best way of doing that. Good old file transfer might be a better way of sharing that kind of data, for example. So I think we've got a far richer problem set than open banking set out to address. So I think our solution will end up being a superset of that.
Wow, thank you. And actually, Chris,
well, I've got it up here.
I know that Chris had a blockchain related question for us, Chris Pritchett. So if you could come off mute and add on to what Erwin was just describing, that'd be great.
It was, I mean, I don't want to take other people's questions time as well, but I was fascinated to hear about sort of a little bit more about the project with Tenet over in Europe and how that works. I think, so as you say, linking sort of an event to the financial compensation paid to a participant. Love that. I suppose the other question, I guess, more for sort of the IoT and supply chain aspects of people's houses, I guess, is what role do we think that distributed ledger technology might play in how people sort of create their own data from the household implements they've got, or the things they're using in industrial commercial uses, particularly when so much of this processing has to be done at the grid edge. And it seems to me that particularly where we're talking about security and privacy, people's rights as individuals and consumers, and this vast amount of data that we really, really want to be seeing flowing in and out of their houses, that there could be a role for that sort of control over their data, that creation of your own pool, and then permissioning out of that. And I suppose it's a question for Erwin, but then perhaps also for Jeremy, as to what level of interest might there be in the supply chain for those kind of solutions that really put customers in control of the data that people can access.
Okay, so I'll answer that firstly by saying I think the idea of people being in control of their data underpinned the whole premise of our smart metering program and the DCC, and I'm less hung up about exactly what technology solution ends up being used. DLT has its place, and there are certain advantages to it. I think there are very few such solutions that couldn't be done in a different way. So, you know, with the DCC, we've created a central body that administers that. That's a way to go. I mean, I think recent successes have shown that distributed approaches, and that's why I'm very keen on Egeria, for example, a distributed metadata sharing project, rather than these big central databases in the sky somewhere, is the way to go. So yes, I think DLT may well have, or blockchain, whichever you choose to use, may well have a significant role, and is a potentially enabling technology. I think the more important thing, though, before making technology choices, is to agree what the models are, agree who owns the data, who should have access. And there's always that balance between privacy and you know, what we as a society think is the best thing to do. So you know, I don't think we can get away from the fact that we need to at some point, we are at the moment balancing privacy against net zero and our drive towards that. I think that other technologies homomorphic encryption, the ability to process data in encrypted form is one that I've kind of been following. It's a bit like fusion that's been kind of on the cusp of becoming production ready for the last 5 years, and it's always 5 years out kind of thing. But so I think there are other technologies like that that are quite exciting, which will help us to make use of data without influencing privacy. So yeah, I think there are lots of different technologies, but I think it's a very healthy debate at the moment in the country in terms of the balance between individuals' rights, privacy concerns, and so on, versus societal good and the elevation of the net zero priority we're giving to net zero. And then I think once we've kind of agreed what it is we want to achieve, then we can pick the right technologies to achieve that.
Interesting. So to answer your question, I have another audience-based question actually, which I'd love to squeeze in because I know we are running out of time. So Lauren has said, as well as EV charging, oh, hang on, my apologies. There was actually a question in the text, that's why I was reading the wrong thing. So to Alastair, in the flowchart showing capacity market at the start and trading options on the right, where would you see open protocol being implemented? Right through.
In the capacity market, in order to comply, you have to do 3 tests a year. So in other words, you have a capability, you've got to show you've got it, and you do as many of them as you can during the winter. So you get, we get action in the summer, but we've got to prove it in the winter. So that's months ahead. And then you have to deliver it in real time. There isn't a period of time when you're not accessing that open protocol.
Brilliant. That's a really succinct one. Thank you. And I know there was one more from Tony in the Q&A. Oh, they've answered them both. It was about, can you see AI working with microgrids in terms of real-time DSR decisions? Perhaps I
didn't actually answer that one. I accidentally clicked on the wrong thing.
Oh, you.
So we'll just starting to type an answer to that one, but I'll answer it live here. So the answer is yes, although I don't think we're quite there yet. I mean, so in a slightly related thing, we do have a research team in Daresbury has got a machine learning model for optimizing aeration in wastewater treatment plants, for example, which would directly impact on set points on SCADA systems. So I think you know we've got research work going on in that kind of space, and I think it will happen. I don't see there's any reason that can't. But clearly explainability will be important. I think treating these neural networks, for example, as pure black boxes is not acceptable. We need to be able to understand what data led to us assigning the different weights and so on. This might be getting a bit technical from an AI point of view, but we need to understand what's happening in those. Otherwise, I don't think we'll want them controlling critical national infrastructure. But I think we are starting to develop the kind of tools that allow us to do that, to get more explainability into AI systems, to remove bias, to validate the quality of our training data and so on. And so yes, I think it's a slow process that we need to go through, but I think we will get there. I think we will at some point see AI working in real time on both DSR decisions and other things.
I could maybe come in on that. We actually have flexed aeration in wastewater treatment relative to mains frequency and fast moving, so it absolutely can deliver. We do have an industry that was designed. I mean, its current incarnation was designed partly in 1990, partly in 2001. It's the Central Trust Authority. That's the structure it's got, and it also has a lot of people in it who want control in control rooms in grid, but in the distribution networks. There are, and what we have to do in order to deliver the value for the consumers that can provide the flexibility that decarbonizes the system is understand what those guys in those control rooms actually want, and the reasons for that. One of the things that National Grid gets bugged about at the moment is the idea of autonomous frequency response, which just basically launches itself off and does its own thing. Too much of a service is just as bad as too little. We've seen high frequency events as a result of unexpectedly high delivery of demand reduction. And one of the stickiest moments recently was last winter when that occurred and frequency started to climb up to, it wasn't that far away from 50.4 hertz, which is a special scary number from National Grid. So we have to respect the fact that control rooms are there actually for quite a good reason.
I agree.
And I'll just add to that, whether AI or just normal logic, programmed logic, any automated response has always the danger of creating race conditions. So we really need a systems thinking understanding of the system to be able to understand and identify potential threats like that, where two automated systems might actually start competing with each other or making decisions based on each other's decisions, which lead to unexpected and undesirable outcomes. So I think we saw some of that in the early days of automated trading, for example.
Please forgive me, I've got to jump off. I've got off Jim right now, so I'm very sorry.
Thank you for coming, Alastair. Thank you. Speak to you soon. Bye. And actually, Jeremy, that's potentially a good time for everybody to draw to a close. I'm sure that this has been a fascinating discussion.
John, you've got 30 seconds or 5 minutes, whichever you like to...
Seconds, Jeremy. Just very quick. I mean, thanks again to the speakers. Those are wonderful. I've really enjoyed these, and congratulations to Anstey and Jeremy for organising it. Very, very quickly. So, perfection. I lost half a day of my life yesterday sitting in a BSI BIM standards committee meeting. Standards are slow, dreadfully slow. And to be honest, half the problem they have is that they need use cases. They need to know what people want to do with the data before they can put a standard around how to deal with it. So, yes, I think the COP11 is a great example of sort of pushing ahead really fast, pushing ahead and just doing stuff. I don't think Alastair would have said it was a fast process, but a good example. The whole point of these sessions was to sort of discuss the issue around, do the supply chain need to talk to the data users and so on. Everything I'm hearing, I think, is you've got two things. You've got the users have new problems. The DNO, the network companies have new problems they've got to solve. And there's lots of technology providers with new solutions. It almost makes a question redundant. I think clearly you need to talk to each other. And I think for the network companies, I think they want to get to a new normal as quickly as possible. I think you can't live your entire life in a world of transition and change. It's not a good way to run businesses. The only way you can accelerate that, I think, other than having a architect, some grand architect who sort of designs it all, it's just talking. There has to be much, much more communication, I think, between all the different groups working on this, just to get some shared experience and sort of develop that sort of new normal, vision of a new normal. Anyway, so I'll let Jeremy pick up now and talk about the next event.
Thanks, John. Yes, more talk. So very, very quickly, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you especially to our panelists and to Anstey for hosting this and for collaborating on this series. In a fortnight's time, we are going to talk about exactly this. We are going to talk about the standards and the standards gaps and maybe some of the more nuts and bolts of this. I haven't confirmed the names of the speakers yet. We'll be looking to have a senior member of BEAMA and hopefully someone from the regulatory community. We're talking to the Cambridge-based Centre for Digital Built Britain. So I noticed they had a slide on Erwin's slide deck. So we will look at some of the more technical aspects of this. And then in 1 month's time, we have the final session where we'll be looking at applications of this for consumers and how we can maximize the benefits of open energy data. We'll be hearing from Jeff Hardy and Maxine Froek on that one. So look forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks' time. Please tell your friends. Please bring them along. You can listen to this. You can catch up. You can listen to this again. You can send it to your friends as a present. And Food Anstey has the link for that. Thank you once again, everybody. Any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to Chris or myself or John or Sarah. And we'd be really happy to talk more in detail, in person, about these issues. So thanks again, Chris.
Thank you,
Thanks
everyone.
so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right.